Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for inviting me here this morning to your opening of your conference. I'm going to talk a little bit about the net zero, the science and the ambition, and how this very much intersects with the views that we've heard about ambition to achieve net zero and the role of nitrogen in that. I'm Professor Paul Monks. I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor to the Department of Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy in the UK, which is one of the main delivery departments for net zero. As the Honourable Excellency, the High Commissioner for Sri Lanka said, the British government signed into law a very ambitious goal in 2008 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 80% of 1990 levels by 2050. While more recently in 2019, raising that ambition to 100% of 1990 levels by 2050. This is very much part of our COP26 ambition as well, because as part of being under the Paris Agreement, we must also publish a nationally determined contribution, which is our highest possible ambition for reduction of that. And we're setting that ambition and encouraging countries around the globe to join us in setting ambitious NDCs to achieve net zero by 2050. As a number of the early speakers have said, it would be wrong to think of net zero targets just in terms of carbon. That intersection between carbon and hydrogen is important, and nitrous oxide, particularly, which has a significant GWP, global warming potential, is an important part of those sort of targets. And it's important that each country considers the best pathway they have to those sort of targets, which draws together the nexus often of carbon, energy and nitrogen together in order to stay below the 2-degree pathway agreed as part of the Paris Agreement. We in the UK have just laid out a very ambitious 6 carbon budget, as the Honourable Excellency once said again, to reduce our emissions by 78% by 2035. And that's going to really require massive expansion in our science and technology, expansion of low carbon energy supplies, take-up of low carbon solutions, less carbon intensive activities, as well as transforming our agriculture, which definitely has a high intersection with understanding of the nitrogen and nitrogen budgets, questions that come along that you're going to be considering over the next few days. It's worth looking at that in terms of the abatement pathways, because I think it's wrong just to think about this in a single context. If we're to achieve net zero, and this is the way the UK is looking at the problem through its carbon budget system, we need to reduce demand for power and carbon. We need to improve the efficiency of the way that we use power, as well as bringing on board low carbon solutions, low carbon energy, and thinking about the way that we use land and agriculture and greenhouse gas recovery as well. For us in the UK, we've set this out in a series of strategies, such as our energy white paper, our upcoming transport decarbonisation plan, our recently published industry decarbonisation plan, and our upcoming heat and building strategy. Very much though, this is embodied in the 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, as previously mentioned, which really says that we should look to develop globally with partners, economic advantage and as well as good environmental outcomes around the net zero agenda. So I was asked to say a few words, and I'm just going to make 3 very quick points around the role that science can play. We're talking about Science Day. It's good to have these great political ambitions and be driving towards that, but we as scientists must support and look at our science to mitigate climate change, but also think about the ways that we can reduce the impacts. And that leads us to science and net zero. I'm going to make 3 very quick points, if I may, this morning at the start of this conference about the role of science. The first you might think is a slightly odd point to make when we've just been talking about such things. But I want to make the point, if we are to reach our goals of net zero by 2050, this is not solely a technocratic solution. It's not just about driving greater technologies. It's also about changing behavioural measures. In our carbon budget 6 here, it shows that nearly 50% of the measures in order to achieve a reduction in carbon require also a change in behaviour as well. Some societal behaviours, such as healthier diets, some changes in patterns of usage, such as aviation demand, changing the way that we use products and making them last longer. Of course, when we intersect with things like healthier diets, increasing, for example, plant-based diets and the like, that changes agricultural methodologies. It drives interesting intersections with the nitrogen economy also as well. So I think the first point I'd like to make is, even though we're at a science conference and we're going to be talking about science and policy, remember the human behavioural angle, which is going to be an incredibly important part of achieving net zero. To the question of innovation, and one of our goals for COP26 is about the way that we can use innovation in order to reach the goals of net zero. And I think frugal technologies, and remembering that technologies of different types and different capabilities are going to be an important part of being able to meet the net zero challenge across the globe. And we in the UK, I think, really interested in thinking about the way that we can use frugal innovation and science and technologies to meet those sort of goals. Just an example of that is the Piggott turbine, which can be produced with simple tools and techniques to drive wind energy in places like Mozambique in Africa. Another very interesting area is that of dark fermentation, anaerobic digestion and the like. This is an example from India. And why I bring this to the fore in something like this fora is we can see the real benefit here of anaerobic digestion to produce power directly or through hydrogen and the like, but also the challenge that that brings to the emissions of something like ammonia and nitrogen. And again, this intersection with nitrogen that you're looking at over the next few days. So an important part of this, which we'll be launching again in COP26, is mission innovation, which is to think about how to make technologies available and affordable as part of this transition to net zero. Enable everybody to benefit from the jobs, health and economic benefits that should come alongside the net zero transition. And mission innovation as part of COP26 will be setting global ambitions, providing political momentum and acting as an organising principle to achieve that. So hopefully my short introduction has made the following key points for you to take home. There's a significant challenge presented by net zero resort. It's a pervasive challenge and runs through everything that we do. We need to accelerate innovation through global leadership and collaboration, such as the sort of thing that we're doing at this meeting today. And science and innovation are a key part of delivering that net zero challenge. Thank you very much indeed for giving me the time to speak at your meeting today.
Thank you, Professor, very much for that very informative presentation. If I could now turn to Professor Mark Sutton, Director of UK Research Institute, Global Challenges Research Fund, South Asian Nitrogen Hub, to talk to us a bit about sustainable nitrogen management in relation to climate mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, there's a flurry of acronyms there and labels. But I'm going to talk about nitrogen management for climate mitigation, green recovery, and I particularly want to thank UKRI for supporting the Global Challenges Research Fund South Asia Nitrogen Hub that is supporting our work, as well as all the flurry of other activities. And so thank you very much to Paul for getting us started. And let's say that nitrogen is an aspect of innovation for climate action. So much conversation about carbon, but it's not only carbon on the way. So why nitrogen for climate action? Let's just acknowledge that it's clear that climate mitigation really does start with the carbon cycle. There's no question about that. But as we want to make further progress, we need to deal with all of the greenhouse gases, and that means methane, carbon dioxide, and not forgetting nitrous oxide. I think this is where we go further, because what we're saying is that if you want to reduce nitrous oxide really significantly, that means a transformation over the overall global nitrogen cycle. We need to think differently about nitrogen. Small technical fixes on nitrous oxide will not be enough. And if we are then grasping the whole nitrogen cycle, that means that transformation of the nitrogen cycle offers multiple win-wins between climate, environment, health, and economy. There's real reason for taking action on nitrogen as a help for climate and as a help for these other issues. Let's just take first, here's a nice picture. This is a little snap out of the DNA molecule. Nitrogen is the stuff of life, and those little bases there that are the genetic code of life, every one of those is packed full of nitrogen compounds. It means that in order to grow life, we need to supply nitrogen compounds for us. That means into fertilizers deliberately, as well as unintentional losses to the environment. When it comes to those unintentional losses, here's a quick primer on all the main nitrogen forms. Dinitrogen. Two nitrogen atoms, very stable, 78% of every breath we take. It does nothing. It makes the sky blue. That's really lovely. We need it for stability. But once we convert it into other forms, like ammonia, that's an air pollutant, nitrogen oxides, urban air pollution, nitrogen dioxide, once that reacts, nitrates in water courses, but also in atmospheric particulate matter. And there at the end, nitrous oxide, the greenhouse gas. We've got a flurry of different nitrogen compounds that are making contributions to all aspects of environmental change. And that's just a short list. Now let's look at this as a cascade. Let's start with fertilizer and crop biological nitrogen fixation. Make crops to feed ourselves. We're losing these different forms of nitrogen into the environment, to air and to water. Once we put livestock in the system, even more. Then there's the combustion sources, adding more again. Now those compounds then start reacting in the atmosphere to particulate matter and in rain, down the streams. The ecosystems become saturated with excess nitrogen, liberating it to the environment until finally it's what we call denitrified, converted back to this atmospheric dinitrogen. So there's a simple cascade, but it demonstrates instantly the complexity of the situation. We could get really sad by that complexity and say, goodness me, what are we going to do? Or we can turn it around and say, if we take action on nitrogen overall, we can make progress on all of those issues simultaneously. And it's worth noting that in terms of the framing we're discussing in relation to the Colombo Declaration, all of those losses can be considered as forms of nitrogen waste. And not only that, but in the global system, we're wasting 80% of the nitrogen resources. Now coming on to climate, and nitrogen again is a multifaceted thing, even when we come to climate. On the left, we've got this warming effect of nitrous oxide. There's also a warming effect of nitrogen on the formation of tropospheric ozone, which has an additional warming effect. Against that, once the nitrogen is in the atmosphere and comes back down again, it has other effects. One is the effect of nitrogen deposition, making trees grow more, and that leads to a cooling effect. There's also a cooling effect of particulate matter. That fine PM that's damaging human health has a cooling effect. Now, how are we going to weigh up those? Do we weigh up the warming versus the cooling? Well, it's not that simple. And the reason for that is these costs. Each one of these is coming with estimated costs. These are costs estimated by the European Nitrogen Assessment. We really don't want that PM in our air. We need cleaner air, but it means that we've got to manage nitrogen in the right place so that we can maximize the benefits and minimize the threat. So if you want a forest to grow, then use extra nitrogen on it, but don't rely on the atmosphere to doing that. We need to tune our system. So let's just think about some evolving narratives for nitrogen action. Stage one, I would say, is fragmentation across nitrogen forms. Each problem considered on its own. We've not made the links. And as a result of that, action is not strongly motivated. More recent framing has been to focus on improving nitrogen use efficiency. It's a positive approach with economy-wide potential, but it's hard to set shared goals. And the third is to reduce overall waste of nitrogen resources. The great thing about that is it's not just about reducing pollution, also reducing denitrification as a waste, and it is an opportunity for focusing on shared goals, fostering the circular economy. Now, here's a view of total nitrogen waste in the globe, a tier one methodology estimate. The y-axis is billions of dollars. So these are the billions of dollars we've been wasting ever since the Stockholm conference in 1972. And of course, nitrogen waste has actually increased since that time. So the question is, how do we go forward? What about this goal to halve nitrogen waste in the Colombo Declaration? Would we achieve it by 2030? What about by 2050? What is the relationship to the net zero? And these are issues which we need to be working on now. This is beginning to be taken seriously. Finessing our definitions, discussing a reference year, considering the relationship to net zero, not only how it can contribute, but the relative ambition. And in the next 2 days, tomorrow we'll be hearing further views from multi-actors and science And on day 3, this is for the governments to be meeting specifically, to be hearing how they want to choose to go forward. Just to go towards finishing off, think about this really as innovation for the circular economy, opportunities in agriculture, industry, wastewater, landscapes, reducing our nitrogen footprints. And as Paul already said, this is also about behavioral change, looking towards healthy diets. We need to move to a world where we're going to this recycling of nitrogen. That means less is needed in, and of course, less wasted in those brown arrows. So let's just finish up. Action on both carbon and nitrogen is needed to reach net zero. We're building on the UN nitrogen resolution, the Colombo Declaration. There's a $100 billion a year opportunity for stimulating green recovery and simultaneous benefits for all of those issues. So with that, thanks very much.
Great, thank you very much for that very informative presentation. And now moving on, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Her Excellency Hanaa Singer, the UN Resident Coordinator here in Sri Lanka, who is going to speak to us about linking up nitrogen action across United Nations activities. Thank you. Over to you, Hanaa.
Thank you very much. Excellencies joining us from Sri Lanka, my dear colleagues and friends, Excellencies joining us from the UK and across the South Asia region, academics, ladies and gentlemen, a wonderful afternoon to all of you and a wonderful morning, of course, to all of you. Let me begin by thanking the British High Commissioner in Colombo and her team for organizing this event that discusses the impact of nitrogen on climate change and how our efforts can spur climate action. It is that this webinar is primarily in Sri Lanka, given the leadership of the government in spearheading the Colombo Declaration in 2019, which is a roadmap for the UN member states for action on nitrogen challenges. Member states solidified commitments to nitrogen management during the UN Environment Assembly session in 2019, when delegates a resolution calling for a coordinated, collaborative approach to sustainable management. As we collectively journey towards the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, we recognize that nitrogen is everywhere and relevant across all the sustainable development goals, as well as in COVID-19 green recovery. So why do we care? Through its biological whole life cycle, nitrogen is a common currency specifically for achieving SDGs 2, SDG 6, SDG 12, 13, 14, and 15. Therefore, there is a need for applying a full chain approach to improving nitrogen use efficiency, including technological, policy, and behavioral interventions affecting the production, consumption, and recycling of nitrogen, as was said by several of the speakers before me. Now, here in Sri Lanka, as in the rest of the world, the increase in reactive nitrogen is causing several environmental problems, such as ozone depletion and climate change. Now, as many of you know, nitrous oxide accounts for 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, with the agriculture accounting for 90% of these emissions. So nitrogen oxide has been reported as one of the major air contaminant in Sri Lanka city, and the agriculture sector accounted for about 82% of the total nitrogen emissions. So what is the UN doing here? The UN in Sri Lanka has partnered with the government to reduce the harmful impact of nitrogen through several of our programs. The WFP, for example, works to reduce excessive use of inorganic fertilizers in farming and promotes the proper management of manure to minimize the release of nitrous oxide. As well as more policy-level intervention through the development of a policy brief on sustainable food systems that helps understand the importance of transforming food systems from being a key contributor to climate change to being part of the solution by sustainably shifting practices across environmental, economic, and social dimensions. Second, the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, partners with the Department of Agriculture to develop fertilizers recommendations based on site-specific application process, with a specific focus on promoting input management of agriculture, especially in vegetable cultivation in the upcountry areas of Sri Lanka. The FAO is also developing a national action plan to reduce, prevent, and recycle food waste, which will reduce the environmental pollution. For instance, the food waste of the Colombo municipality, which is around 310 metric tons per day, with only a small portion to be reused. Now, finally, developing partnership at the policy level and creating awareness is the focus of UNDP, which is working on policy dialogue in partnership with the British High Commission and others, intended to convene key cross-cutting stakeholders, decision makers, development practitioners, and policymakers to raise awareness on green development, reach wide-ranging consensus on a green pathway, and to establish a multi-sectoral platform that can influence the policy-making sphere in realizing a green recovery. Additionally, also UNDP, the Climate Resilient Integrated Water Management Program, has helped and supported the government of Sri Lanka to develop a national guidelines on climate smart agriculture. Now, so now what? Nitrogen, as the world's most important nutrient, requires a full chain approach to increase its overall efficiency and to reduce the environmental impact. It will be critical now to establish suitable roadmaps at the level of individual countries that enable policymakers, businessmen, and other stakeholders to plan ahead and implement the right action. These efforts require, as Admiral Colombage was saying, requires global consensus and concrete actions, especially now in the context of COVID-19 recovery. As the Secretary General noted at the Leaders Summit on Climate last week, only 18 to 24% of the pandemic recovery spending is expected to contribute to mitigating emissions, reducing air pollution, or strengthening natural capital. He noted that the trillions of dollars needed for COVID-19 recovery is money we are borrowing from future generations. And we cannot use these resources to lock in policies that burden the future generation with a mountain of debt on a broken planet. Therefore, I hope that through the discussions during the next 3 days, we are able to agree on a path forward to manage nitrogen, safeguard our planet, recover from COVID, and ensure that we provide future generations a planet that is in better shape than when we arrived on it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, and I'm sure we all agree with your final sentiments there about handing things on in better shape. So I'd now like to turn to His Excellency Ken O Flaherty, our COP26 Regional Ambassador. Ken, over to you.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner, and Excellencies, Honourable Ministers, State Ministers, Deputy Ministers, officials from South Asia and the UK, distinguished participants and ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today at this virtual Nitrogen for Climate and Green Recovery Conference. In the few minutes I have, I'd like to focus on the UK's role in convening and driving climate ambition globally, and also touch a little bit on how my own role as Regional COP26 Ambassador is hopefully helping to contribute to that agenda across the Asia-Pacific and South Asia region. So, we know and have heard how climate change poses risks to human health, to ecosystems, social and cultural systems, and our overall economic development. But I'd like to underline that it also provides opportunities. Our goal should be to reduce the risk and to take advantage of those opportunities. We know that adapting to the potential effects of climate change is a complex and ongoing process. It requires actions by individuals, by communities, by governments, and by international agencies. Some recent reports have suggested that the COVID-19 pandemic's economic slowdown may reduce temporarily global carbon dioxide emissions by about 7% this year, which of course sounds relatively positive. But unfortunately, we also know that that temporary dip will have little to no effect if, as is currently predicted by many economists, emissions sharply rise again as economies around the world return to growth. The only way to avoid this is if all countries now prioritize a green recovery. Governments are today working together to tackle the COVID pandemic. It's no less essential to be working together against the other major emergency that is facing mankind, the climate emergency. We have some way to go to meet our global climate targets. Our overarching target is, of course, to stay within the 1.5-degree limit set out in the Paris Agreement. And in short, the world needs to reach net zero carbon emissions by the middle of this century if we are to stop global temperature rises exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius. And failure to do that will be catastrophic for economies and for citizens worldwide, notably here in South Asia. So to be absolutely clear, we are at a hugely important juncture for climate action, and the UK must use our role as COP presidency this year to be driving continued climate action. We want to continue to build ambition on the road to COP26 and Glasgow in November. But how are we going to go about that? Well, as we've already mentioned, we must of course continue to cut our global carbon emissions, but we need more ambition on mitigation, ambition on adaptation, and ambition on access to finance as well. On mitigation, we have to be clear about achieving clear net zero targets with aligned nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, that keep that 1.5 degrees within reach. And we also need to pursue policies like phasing out coal power to show that we're serious about tackling this challenge. Countries must continue to submit commitments, but those commitments need to be supported by clear and credible plans. On adaptation, we need to urgently adapt to protect communities and natural habitats. Even if we stopped emissions rising today, we would still need to deal with significant disruption, extreme weather, and climate-related shocks. Countries need to adapt to the impacts of climate change, and that will require substantial finance. We have to ensure that developed countries, including here in South Asia, deliver on their promise to mobilize $100 billion each year in climate finance for the developing countries such as Sri Lanka and others in the region. And we must mobilize the private sector to deliver the trillions in investment that will be needed. And finally, and importantly, we need to focus on collaboration. Collaboration is absolutely key. We need to be working together to accelerate action, and we cannot work in silos. It can help us to overcome together critical challenges and help individual sectors to make faster progress. Now, one of my key responsibilities as regional COP ambassador is to be engaging countries across South Asia as part of that international agenda. And I can confirm that I've seen real appetite for multilateral and bilateral cooperation, including here in Sri Lanka. It's clear that countries are starting to commit to the ambitious targets needed. We've seen decisions by countries across Asia, by Japan, China, South Korea, of course, but also Nepal, the Maldives, Laos, and Myanmar to set net zero targets. We have seen announcements of coal moratoria, that is, decisions to build no more coal power plants by the governments of Pakistan and by the Philippines. And just last week, we heard from South Korea that it would no longer finance coal power overseas, and Japan is expected to follow suit soon. But despite these positive commitments, we do know that we need to make more progress faster across the planet and throughout the South Asia region. The climate emergency continues to be a joint endeavour, and part of that endeavour is ensuring that voices from across government and non-state actors from business, industry, civil society and others feature and share knowledge and information that helps to drive that climate action. I think today's event is a very clear illustration of exactly that endeavour. It will be sharing both scientific and policy perspectives to help us mobilise action on climate change, and I very much look forward to learning more about the role that nitrogen plays in this too. So it's fantastic to see so many South Asian partners represented at this event today, and so many key climate influencers coming together to share their views on positive climate action. I'd like to finish by thanking the Government of Sri Lanka and the British High Commission for co-hosting this event, and for Professor Mark Sutton and his various teams for helping to convene such an impactful event in what continues to be very testing circumstances for us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I think we are now going to turn to two videos. I will hand over to Martha, but I think we have first a 1-minute video launch, Nitrogen for Net Zero, and secondly, a statement from His Excellency, the President of Sri Lanka, read out by His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka, Dinesh Gunawardane. Martha, over to you. Thank you.
I will now press play on the video.
share the additional video.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to address you today at this preparatory high-level regional e-meeting. This meeting represents a positive step towards addressing the important issue of nitrogen management ahead of the 26th Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, hosted by the Government of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland later this year. Sustainable environmental policies require not only environmental conservation, but also improving social and economic practices so that nations can sustain their people and their natural environments in the long term. For its part, the government of Sri Lanka has adopted balanced policies that promote the sustainability of our biodiversity, forest cover, waterways and oceanic resources, alongside the socio-economic requirements of our citizens. Inculcating a sense of environmental sensitivity and responsibility among our future generations is critically important and is included in our ongoing educational reforms. At the Biodiversity Summit of the United Nations General Assembly last year, I made an appeal to the world leaders for the better management of nitrogen. Climate scientists have been studying and grappling with the impact of increased carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere for decades. I believe it is important to address the issue of nitrogen waste in a similarly urgent way and to broaden the ongoing discourse on climate change accordingly. With agricultural comprising of the primary means of livelihood for significant section of our population, the issue of nitrogen management is particularly important to Sri Lanka. It is estimated that approximately 80% of the nitrogen fertilizer used domestically is wasted and ends up in atmosphere, land and water. Transportation and other industries also release gaseous reactive nitrogen, which entraps heat and contributes to faster global warming. I am aware that such issues are common to countries in our region, and that the adverse consequences of these issues will prove challenging to our governments in the medium and long term. Improved nitrogen management through comprehensive study, more awareness building, and the creating better solutions for the dual imperatives of sustaining economic activity and the environment is therefore of critical importance. Such actions need to be guided by timely policy decisions, not just at the national level, but also regionally and globally. I am confident that the deliberations of this forum will help bring together the governments of the South Asian region towards a common understanding on this issue. This will in turn have a positive impact on the decision arrived at during the 26th conference of the parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change later this year. In concluding, I convey my best wishes to you for a successful and a productive forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much for both those videos, lots to reflect on there. We're now joined by Mr. Shah Zaman Maiwandi, the Director General of the National Environmental Protection Agency of Afghanistan. Over to you, sir.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good morning, and good afternoon. I'm honored and privileged to speak virtually here today on behalf of the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. I have the pleasure to thank the United Nations. I have the pleasure to thank the government of the Democratic Republic of Sri Lanka, the High Commission of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in Colombo, and the South Asia Cooperative Environment Program, SACE, for hosting this remarkable virtual conference of the Nitrogen for Climate and Green Recovery, and effective pathways of inclusive action towards achieving the sustainable nitrogen management through measures, actions, and ambition plans to reach out the net zero with multiple co-benefits. Mr. Chairman, as we all know, nitrogen plays a significant role in our food and livelihood systems. However, in the meantime, it could be harmful to the environment in excessive amounts. Globally, the nitrogen cycle is severely altered by heterogeneous human activity than the global carbon cycle, with serious implications for human health, ecosystem, biodiversity, and natural resources qualities such as air and water quality. Consequences can be further aggravated by climate change and vice versa, which can affect all aspects of climate change considerations, including mitigation, adaptation, and impacts. Climate change and its extreme events floods, and drought will significantly alter nitrogen cycling processes, affecting the natural environment, loss of biodiversity in aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems, as well as human health. As a developing country, Afghanistan has yet to utilize extensive amounts of nitrogen in agriculture and other sectors. However, climate change and its extreme events have seriously affected Afghanistan. Distinguished delegates, based on the latest data published in the National Greenhouse Gases Inventory Report of Afghanistan, nitrogen oxide emissions increased strongly during the period 1990 to 2017 from 200 gigagram to 634 gigagram, which was an increase of 316.5% since 1992, mainly due to increasing emissions from households. Other sources of these gases are motor vehicles and boilers for heat production. Nitrous oxide emissions show a twofold increase, resulting in 6,117 gigagram carbon dioxide equivalent in 2017 as compared to 3,326 gigagram carbon dioxide equivalent in 1990. This increase was mainly due to higher nitrous oxide emissions from agricultural practices, showing a consistent share of around 90% of the nitrous oxide emissions throughout the year, followed by transport, wastewater treatment, and manual management, each having 3%, 3%, and 2.3% contribution respectively. Similarly, as per the observed data between 1960 to 2008, there has been an increase in the rate of drought occurrence and drought duration, an increase in mean annual temperature of 0.6 degree as compared to 1960, and an increase in seasonal variation of precipitation and reduction of spring precipitation, rising to both occurrence of flood and drought. Ladies and gentlemen, since Afghanistan emits a minuscule amount of nitrogen compared to other developing countries in the region, as per the recent data, it seems obvious that emissions will keep increasing to reach new economic and food security heights. However, climatic variation is alarming. Therefore, to protect and restore nature and to achieve sustainability in nitrogen and climate change nitrogen interaction and other to tackle environment and socioeconomic problems, there's a need for increased environment and climate financing, greater cooperation nationally, internationally, and mainstreaming nature, environment, and all policies, strategies, and plans with science, technology, research, and innovation at the center. I would like to thank once again the event organizers and managers for hosting this distinguished webinar. We are looking forward to working together towards the common goal of nitrogen for net zero. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Director General. I think His Excellency Shahab Uddin has maybe not been able to join us yet, but I would just pause to check whether he has made it onto the line.
Thank you, British High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am delighted and honored to attend the pre-COP26 virtual event on nitrogen for climate green recovery. I am also pleased to learn that the 3-day event will help launch and develop the nitrogen for net zero with member countries of the SACER, preparing the way to widen engagement on the pathway to COP26. Our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, dreamed of hunger and poverty-free Bangladesh and prosperous nation with a high living standard for citizens. For the accomplishment of the dream of Bangabandhu, a golden Bangladesh, we have prepared 20 years long Vision 2041 perspective plan of Bangladesh under the dynamic leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Bangladesh has met all the UN criteria to graduate from the list of LDC to developing countries. Present government of Bangladesh is committed to protect and improve the environment and the preserve and safeguard the natural resources, biodiversity, wetlands, forests, and wildlife for the present and future generation. Bangladesh has been working actively with the development partners and international organizations to attain SDGs, including conservation of environment, ecology, and biodiversity. Human activities have been rapidly changing natural nitrogen cycle since past decades. This harmful for environment as well as ecosystem. Scientists across the globe have been convinced to take action for reactive nitrogen management. Like other South Asian countries, Bangladesh is also to initial stage for nitrogen management. Agriculture sector has been identified as major reactive nitrogen realizing sector. Ministry of Agriculture has taken a good number of the initiative to tackle excessive use of urea fertilizer, which is helpful for nitrogen management. Bangladesh, like other South Asian countries, has been working with Shahab and South Asian Nitrogen Hub for developing common evidence-based policy framework for sustainable nitrogen management for South Asian countries. Reactive nitrogen is not only responsible for environmental and ecological damage, but also responsible for global warming and ozone depletion, which increases the relevancy of nitrogen management globally. So the pre-COP26 South Asian event, nitrogen for climate and green recovery, is essential event. Nitrogen for climate and green recovery is essential event for South Asian nations. I wish all the success of this nitrogen for net zero initiative on COP26 to meet the climate goal. Bangladesh will continue its support for nitrogen management and climate change related issues along with Shahab members countries. Bangladesh is also committed to adopt policy or framework related to nitrogen management, which will not interrupt its sustainable development and food security. I would like to express my thanks and gratitude to the government of the Kingdom and the government of the Sri Lanka for arranging this important and timely event. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Turning now to the Honourable Phento Tshering, Director of the National Environment Commission Secretariat from the Royal Government of Bhutan. You have the floor. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, warm greetings from Bhutan. It's my pleasure to participate at the pre-COP26 regional event, Nitrogen for Climate and Green Recovery. I thank the British High Commission, the Government of Sri Lanka, the International Nitrogen Management System, and the GCRF South Asian Nitrogen Hub for convening this very important regional event. Bhutan commands the UK-led initiative of Nitrogen for net zero supported by India and Sri Lanka and recognizes the need of sustainable nitrogen management to meet climate goals in preparation for COP26. Although the current global COVID-19 pandemic has delayed the climate negotiation process, we must not delay the climate action. On the climate front, science is robust and clear. It tells us that in order for us to achieve the 1.5 degree Celsius goal of the Paris Agreement in limiting the global temperature rise, the world needs to halve the global emission by 2030 and achieve net zero carbon emission by 2050. There is no denying to it. However, in the recent NDC synthesis report shows that the collective global ambition is much lower than what is actually required. That is 45% global emission reduction from 2010 level by 2030. If we are to limit global average temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius, this clearly indicates that net zero will be impossible to achieve without action on nitrogen. Any action to net zero, the plans need to take into consideration the green and inclusive approach, as this COVID-19 pandemic has clearly taught us that business as usual is not working, and there is a tremendous window of opportunity for transformative green recoveries to build back better, to deliver stronger climate sustainability, health, and economic outcome. As a responsible global citizen, in recognizing the amplified set of challenges created by COVID conspiring with climate, all the actions on the COVID recovery are in line with the need of environmental protection and addressing climate change. Based on our strong conviction to our guiding development philosophy of Prof national happiness, all our recovery are completely in line with inclusive, greener, and climate resilient policies. Plans were reprioritized to ensure that resources are used effectively to synergize COVID climate nexus. Bhutan has always placed conservation of environment and climate change in forefront despite our own pressing social and economic development priorities and needs. In fact, we have been ahead of the race and has already achieved the global goal of net zero carbon emission back in 2009, when the rest of the world aspires to achieve by 2050. We are not only carbon neutral, we are carbon negative, in fact, and our current sequestration capacity is 2/4 more than what we actually emit. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as you all are well aware, Bhutan is an agriculture-based society where more than half of our population currently resides in the rural areas and are dependent on subsistence agriculture for livelihood. Our current our current nitrogen emission is insignificant and emitted as survival emission. According to Bhutan, third national communication to the UNFCCC 2020, the nitrous oxide emission for the inventory year 2015 was 120.27 gigagrams carbon dioxide equivalent only. As an agriculture-based society, reducing nitrogen emission is a challenging task for us. Nonetheless, efforts and measures are put in place. Bhutan aspires to become 100% organic nation by phasing out use of harmful chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Bhutan adopted Organic Master Plan in 2012 and is backed up by Roadmap of Agriculture Organic Developmental Strategies under the current 12 Five-Year Plan. Import of chemical fertilizers and pesticides and its distribution are highly regulated in Bhutan and are managed by National Seed Center, National Plant Protection Center under the Department of Agriculture. Climate smart agriculture and livestock farming are promoted through organic farming to achieve food and nutrition security, at the same time mitigating the emission of nitrogen from the process. Although the action identified are small in nature, Bhutan is doing our fair share in mitigating climate change, and concerted effort from global communities in terms of action, support, and other means are crucial. I believe that there are a series of events and discussions taking place to facilitate the process leading to COP26. I would like to urge once again that net zero without action nitrogen would be impossible. The process must be inclusive and all must participate in the process. Once again, I would like to thank for the leadership on Nitrogen for Net Zero initiative. Please be of our full support on the road to COP26. I thank you and Tashidele.
Thank you very much for joining us, Director, and for those words. If I may, I'll now turn to His Excellency Dr. Hussain Rasheed Hassan, the Minister of Environment for the Maldives. Over to you, Your Excellency.
Ministers, Ambassadors, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we thank United Kingdom and Sri Lanka for organizing this important and timely event, pre-COP26 Nitrogen, Climate and Green Recovery event. While our focus is on COVID-19 pandemic, the most pressing issue facing the humanity today, the climate change is still persists. Our islands are still exposed to extreme weather events. The frequency and magnitude of these extreme events are still on the rise, causing damages to people and livelihoods. The economic crisis brought about by the pandemic, coupled with the negative impacts of climate change, exacerbates the vulnerability of small, low-lying island nations such as the Maldives, by further weakening our capacity and ability to achieve sustainable development. In the Maldives, our natural resources largely come from our marine environment. We essentially depend on our rich coral reefs and our pristine environment for our sustenance. Our main industries, tourism and fisheries, depends on ocean services. As a major climate change victim, we are particularly concerned with increasing levels of greenhouse gas emissions and increasing global average temperature. The science is very clear. If global average temperature increased by 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial level, 70 to 90% of the coral reefs in the tropical oceans will be degraded. Can you imagine what will happen to island nation like us, a coral atoll nation like us? Our very existence will be in question. So when we talk about this, we take this very seriously. One of the core policies of our government as we look to rebuild from the pandemic is to focus on greener and resilient sustainable development. Indeed, we are to achieve this. We must develop plans and strategies to allocate resources into the efficient manner. In our updated NDC, which is submitted to the UNCCC, we have emphasized the importance of enhancing our adaptation. We are committed to achieve net zero by 2030 on condition that we receive the extensive support that we need. At present, over 11% of our total energy is derived from renewable sources. In the next 2 years, we believe the share is going to be doubled, and we are working on that. If we are to achieve our net zero targets, we need access to finance be more flexible and easily accessible. Our NDCs are not worth the paper it's written on without access to finance. So access to finance need to be more flexible and accessible. And right now, it is very difficult to achieve and access finance. And the rules relating to access to finance need to change for the better. Without access to finance, we will not be able to implement the projects and programs that we have actually committed in our NDCs. With regards to nitrogen management, our current knowledge base on nitrogen and its cycle is very limited. As such, we would welcome assistance of other countries to help us better understand the nitrogen cycle and its effects on our environment and undertake necessary actions to mitigate its negative impacts on human health, climate, and ecosystems. Despite all the challenges we face and the fact that Maldives' share in global greenhouse gases is only 0.003%, we are committed to do our part and continue to advocate emission reductions worldwide. We are determined to show leadership and continue to advocate for more ambitious climate actions to address the climate emergency. The upcoming COP26 will be an important stepping stone if we are to build back better and greener. We must kickstart the full implementation of the Paris Agreement without any delays. In order to do so, we must complete the Paris Rulebook by carrying out the unfinished business from the outstanding works. We are still far behind the goals of mobilizing the US $100 billion annually by 2020 by the developing nations. In fact, only 10% of that was realized. If developing countries are to meet the Paris Agreement targets, scaling up of finances and extending support is of utmost importance. Furthermore, the presidency also needs to facilitate to build momentum for more ambitious actions in engaging all stakeholders as we embark on full implementation of the agreement. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude, may I reiterate the importance of cooperations and support from our partners, especially for the vulnerable countries such as the Maldives, to enhance our climate action and to achieve a more sustainable, resilient future for the present and future generations. I thank you.
Honourable Minister, thank you very much for that presentation. Moving on, I would like to introduce His Excellency Prem Ale Magar, the Minister of Forest and Environment of the Government of Nepal. Over to you, Your Excellency. Thank you.
Respected co-chairs, Honourable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a matter of great pleasure and privilege to participate and share a few words at this virtual event. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the British High Commission, Colombo, and the government of Sri Lanka for organizing this important event, Nitrogen for Climate and Green Recovery, in this difficult time of COVID-19 pandemic. Today, we are here to launch the Nitrogen for Net Zero initiative with the member countries of the South Asian Cooperative Environment Program on the need for more strengthened and collaborative efforts to reduce nitrogen pollution for a clean and green environment. The initiative relevant and proactive to beat the adverse impact of climate change and to address the environmental concerns globally to secure our common future. Respected co-chairs, in the past decades, sewage, livestock, waste, fossil fuel burning, and inefficient use to synthetic fertilizers have increased the nitrogen flow to the environment, causing significant adverse impact to our environment, biodiversity, and human health. To mitigate these problems, enabling integrated nitrogen management strategies and taking nitrogen pollution as a core element of the National Environmental Program should be the priority of all member states. The agriculture sector is the major source of nitrogen emissions, and efforts should be made to reduce it. The maximum allowable national emissions limits for nitrogen oxide and ammonia needs to be lowered down. Nepal is among the most vulnerable countries to climate change. I would like to take this opportunity to share that the government of Nepal has taken various initiatives in devising appropriate policies, legal instruments, programs, institutional and financial arrangement toward climate resilience. Nepal is committed to acting on mitigating the known causes of climate change in line with the Paris Agreement. Nepal is formulating a long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategy by 2021. The strategy aims to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2050. However, realizing that achieving net zero is almost impossible without action on nitrogen, efforts are essential to reduce the nitrogen pollution from the member states. With the declaration of the UK government hosting COP26, the government of Nepal proactively aimed to engage more strategically and effectively at the national and international level to raise awareness of the needs and priorities of Nepal, especially the mountain agenda. With this, Nepal has an unique opportunity to ensure its high international profile on climate change and in live raising and mainstreaming non-traditional and low carbon financing. We all have been giving high priority for achieving sustainable development goals by 2030. In the meantime, the Colombo Declaration has agreed on ambition to have nitrogen waste from all sources by 2030. In this regard, we urge UN Environment Development Partners and member countries to focus efforts on building national capacities of least developed and developing member states. In the end, I wish success for this event. Once again, thank you very much for giving this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, the High Commissioner, as mentioned, has had to leave for another appointment, so I will continue to chair the remainder of the meeting in the High Commissioner's absence. Just by way of quick introduction, my name is Drew Price. I'm the head of the Prosperity section. One of my key policy areas is climate and the environment, hence my involvement with this conference. So without further ado, if I could turn to His Excellency Ashraf Haidari, Director General of the South Asian Cooperative Environment Programme.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Foreign Minister Dinesh Gunawardane, Her Excellency High Commissioner Sarah Hulton, Excellencies and Ministerial Heads of Delegation, distinguished scientists, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I wish to express our gratitude at the South Asia Cooperative Environment Programme, SACEP, to the esteemed government of Sri Lanka, the British High Commission, and the South Asia Nitrogen Hub for organizing our pre-COP26 gathering for the next couple of days. And I thank the organizers for the opportunity to say a few words, reiterating what has already been highlighted today. Indeed, climate change is one of the key threats to humanity. And South Asia, as one of the most vulnerable regions to global warming, climate change puts at risk the very lives and livelihoods of hundreds of millions of our impoverished peoples across the region. The consequences of not meeting those targets are laid out in the recent IPCC reports, which elucidate how the global drive for net zero emission is necessary to avoid the worst case scenarios. Sadly, South Asia has already begun experiencing some of those worst case scenarios, from mountainous Afghanistan and Nepal to coastal India and Pakistan, where human security remains under constant attack from the adverse effects of climate change. Consequently, to help achieve the Paris Agreement targets and the purpose of the UNFCCC, it is important to address nitrogen along with carbon. Needless to say, nitrogen is everywhere and visible. It's in the air, in the water, in the soil, and in the life around us. While nitrogen is an essential element for life, reactive nitrogen, due to human intervention, has become too excessive. This directly pollutes water, air, ecosystems, and soils, while its greenhouse effect greatly contributes to climate change. In a global context, nitrogen is one of the hot spots for nitrogen pollution. Regionally, the sources of nitrogen pollution are mainly direct and indirect emissions from soils, combustion for electricity and heat, transport, and industries. At SACEP, we know that emissions from different sectors differ in each of our member states, and it is all driven by different sets of national circumstances. At the same time, however, we know that the impact and pollution from nitrogen does not stop at national borders. It has contributed to severe environmental and public health pressures in South Asia. That's why the best way to address the challenge of nitrogen pollution is through much more enhanced regional cooperation and coordination. As a collective goal, this needs to be achieved by multi-ministerial actions and multi-country collaboration. The South Asian countries have been among the earliest to have taken the initiative in addressing nitrogen pollution. Early actions include the establishment of the South Asian Nitrogen Center, SNAC, of the International Nitrogen Initiative in 2008. A resolution on sustainable nitrogen management led by India was adopted in the 4th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly in 2019. And this was followed up by the Colombo Declaration on Sustainable Nitrogen Management. Ongoing efforts by SACEP in partnership with the South Asia Nitrogen Hub to deliver on the nitrogen policy framework for South Asia at the behest of the SACEP member states is an example which demonstrates the South Asian government's eagerness and political will to address the challenge of nitrogen pollution and its sustainable management. However, I also wish to acknowledge the barriers and gaps that exist in deploying effective solutions at the ground level. They include a lack of awareness of nitrogen pollution, a lack of research and knowledge, a lack of cost-effective technologies, as well as a lack of adequate financing, especially financing which was also pointed out by one of our colleagues a while ago. In other words, there's a serious gap of means of implementation which needs to be bridged to match the political enthusiasm for sustainable nitrogen management to see tangible policy interventions and outcomes we all seek to achieve. To that end, I assure your excellencies of our firm commitment at SACEP to further facilitating regional cooperation and coordination among our 8 member states to address the challenge of nitrogen pollution. This effort should make a notable collective contribution to the implementation of the Paris Agreement targets as we all prepare for a results-driven COP26. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Director General Mr. Ashraf Hadari. Very grateful for your comments. That brings us to the end of the keynote speeches section. Unfortunately, the advisor to the Prime Minister from Pakistan was unable to make it, and I think for obvious reasons, representation from India was not possible either. I'd like to now move on to the panel discussion. The chair for the panel discussion will be Hassanti Dissanayake, Director General for Ocean Affairs, Environment and Climate Change. Hassanti, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Excellencies, distinguished guests, panelists. Welcome to the panel discussion with the representatives of UN conventions. As you are aware, we cannot get to net zero without action on nitrogen. As countries prepare to go to the next stage for climate in the year of COP26, there is an opportunity to bring nitrogen action into the debate to help countries meet ambitious climate goals. To be effective in reducing the greenhouse gas nitrous oxide, we need to transform overall human management of the global nitrogen cycle. Of course, system-wide change is needed, reducing all nitrogen waste. What is nitrogen waste? For this event, let's consider nitrogen waste as all reactive nitrogen resources that are lost either intentionally or unintentionally, which can be considered a waste of resources. Technically, it can be considered as the sum of all forms of nitrogen pollution loss to the environment plus denitrification back to dinitrogen. Although not pollution as such, it is still a waste of resources, which indirectly amplifies other forms of nitrogen pollution. When embracing a system-wide approach to sustainable nitrogen management, there are multiple win-win situations for climate, air, water, biodiversity, health, and economy. In this panel discussion, we aim to hear from different UN agency representatives on their perspectives on how climate and nitrogen are linked. The discussion is led with 3 rounds of questions and 1 rapid question. Let me now briefly introduce the panelists. Dirk Nemitz is a program officer at the UNFCCC Secretariat based in Bonn. He has worked extensively on agriculture, forestry, and other land use under UNFCCC over the past 10 years, including RED Plus, and Article 5 of Paris Agreement. He also leads the Secretariat support to Coronemia joint work on agriculture since its inception in 2017. Jennifer Kerr is chair of the Working Group on Strategies and Review, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, Geneva Air Convention. She is also the director of air emission priorities at Environment and Climate Change Canada and is based in Ottawa. She will be speaking in her capacity as the chair of the Air Convention's WGSR. David Cooper is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity based in Montreal. David is a specialist in policy and science related to biodiversity and global change. He has many years of experience in international environmental negotiations. Leticia Carvalho is the head of Marine and Freshwater Branch of United Nations Environment Programme based in Nairobi. Her team leads on nitrogen and nutrient issues at UNEP, including global partnership on nutrient management and follow-up to the UNIA 4 resolution on sustainable nitrogen management. On behalf of the organizers, I welcome all panelists to this discussion. Let me now open this panel discussion and request panelists to try and frame your response for not more than 2 minutes. The question one is, each of you represent different UN conventions and programs. Why is nitrogen relevant to convention or the program you represent? And what are the main links with climate change? I wish to invite Dirk from UNFCCC first.
Thank you for that question, Hassanti.
Yeah.
And thank you also for inviting UNFCCC to this important meeting. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I mean, it's quite obvious who has the connection with N2O and climate change. It's a potent greenhouse gas, or GHG. An IPCC scenario is compatible with limiting warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade, as you pointed out, requires significant emission reductions for N2O. The reason is a combination of two main characteristics of N2O. First, it's a long-lived climate enforcer, which accumulates in the atmosphere over decades and centuries. So the effect persists for a long time. We usually assume that at least for 100 years, which is far beyond current long-term goals and our discussion horizon for climate change action. In addition, N2O is also vastly more potent than carbon dioxide, for example, by a factor of 261 is the last I saw in the draft of the IPCC AR6. The amount of carbon dioxide emission that would have an equivalent warming effect as 1 ton of N2O is 261 tons of CO2. Currently, N2O emissions are globally still continue to increase, with agriculture dominating emissions, notably from managed soils. As I said, reaching the Paris Agreement goal to remain below 1.5 degrees will require to change this trend. At the same time, nitrous oxide remains challenging to measure. N2O is produced naturally from a wide variety of biological sources in soil and water, particularly microbial action in wet tropical forests. Current estimates are that about 40% of total N2O emissions are anthropogenic, and these anthropogenic emissions are addressed by the Framework Convention on Climate Change. These anthropogenic N2O emissions estimates are also subject to considerable uncertainty, larger than those from methane emissions, for example. There's a high uncertainty of input data, fertilizer use, livestock manure availability, storage, applications, also management, the emission factors, and there are additionally also sources that are not yet well understood, peatland degradation, permafrost, and others. All of this needs to change to apply and implement effective climate change mitigation measures. At the same time, there are many interactions and synergies. Methodologies and projects that can reduce emissions can often have significant synergies with long-term sustainability, resilience of agricultural production systems, and reduced negative externalities, as we've heard, including for farmers' income and human health. These, I would call them no-regret options, have to be implemented as quickly as possible to avoid lock-in another 100 years of warming with each emitted ton. This should give a quick summary from our perspective. Thank you, Asante.
Thank you, Dirk. Next, I invite Jennifer from UNECE Air Convention. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you for asking me to be part of this event and to take part in this session. That includes so many distinguished participants. I'm quite honored to be here. So a tiny bit about the Air Convention. What we call the Air Convention is actually the UNECE Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, and it's a regional convention as opposed to a global convention. It has a number of protocols, but the key active protocol is the Gothenburg Protocol, or the protocol to abate acidification, eutrophication, and ground level ozone. And that protocol deals with transboundary air pollution, including sulfur dioxide, fine particulate matter, ozone, nitrogen oxides, and ammonia, both emissions and ambient concentrations. So the aspects of nitrogen losses that are most important under the Air Convention are, of course, nitrogen oxides and ammonia. And then, of course, ammonia is a precursor to ambient fine particulate matter, and NOx is a precursor to ground level ozone. So it's all quite complicated in the air world. So both environment and health are big drivers for addressing transboundary air pollution. And in fact, PM 2.5 is hugely important from a health perspective. But there are also links to climate change. And if I might, I'm just going to do a small plug for our regional convention. It's been a bit of a pioneer in looking at synergies between key environmental problems. It's long had a focus on ground level ozone and its precursors, including nitrogen oxides. And ozone is also a short-lived climate pollutant and itself a greenhouse gas. And in 2012, the convention added black carbon, which is another short-lived climate pollutant or an air pollutant with climate warming effects, to the protocol. And black carbon is co-emitted with PM 2.5 emissions. And I'm sure all folks here know that the 1.5 degrees we're aiming for is not possible without both greenhouse gas and short-lived climate pollutant reductions. But just back to nitrogen, I don't claim to understand all the science. Everyone who knows me would know me as a policy expert. I do know it's very complicated and it has various impacts on climate, both cooling and warming, as we heard from Professor Sutton earlier. So from the Air Convention's perspective, we're aiming to reduce PM 2.5 because it always has health impacts. But its climate impacts, for example, depend very much on its composition. So if fine particulate matter has a lot of black carbon, it's warming. If it has a lot of ammonium nitrates, for example, it can be cooling. But of course, we can't increase PM to help cool the climate. So to me, this means we need to figure out how to manage nitrogen properly. And we've heard nitrogen is a key linking issue. It links air pollution, water pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, stratospheric ozone depletion, and biodiversity loss and soil protection. So we need to figure out how to manage it, and an integrated approach to addressing nitrogen across the cycle could be very helpful in this regard from our perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Can I now invite David from the Convention on Biological Diversity, please?
Thank you, Asante, and thanks to you and to the government of Sri Lanka for your leadership on this really important issue. From a biodiversity point of view, it's quite simple. Nitrogen waste, nitrogen pollution is a major cause of biodiversity loss. Essentially, excess reactive nitrogen, fertilizers in particular, but also wastewater, the runoff from these essentially over-fertilizes aquatic ecosystems, depriving them then of oxygen and causing dead zones, often massive dead zones in freshwater and especially coastal ecosystems, this harming fisheries and marine environments more generally. And on top of that, deposition of nitrogen from the air basically decreases plant diversity, essentially allowing weedier species to outcompete others. So from a biodiversity point of view, reducing nitrogen waste is really essential. And of course, by contributing to mitigating climate change, that also is another important driver of biodiversity loss. Secondly, of course, biodiversity itself is important here. It can be part of the solution. Better management of soils, enriching biodiversity in soils, nutrient cycles in soils, better management of wetlands can help to solve this problem. So really we look at this from these two sides, addressing a major driver of biodiversity loss and using biodiversity as part of that solution. Thanks.
Thank you, David. And I would like to now invite Leticia from UNEP.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for having me on this panel discussion. I really congratulate the British High Commission and the government of Sri Lanka for jointly organizing this very important meeting. UNEP's mission is to provide the leadership and encourage partnerships in caring for the environment. And we are used to do this by inspiring, informing, and enabling nations and peoples to improve their quality of life without compromising the future of the future generations, in fact. So why nitrogen is so important for UNEP? Nitrogen is extremely relevant for UNEP's work, given that it cuts across all major environmental challenges. We've heard a lot about it today: climate change, stratospheric ozone, air pollution, terrestrial freshwater and coastal ecosystems, food systems, with impact on biodiversity, human health, and economy. And this was made very clear and evident from the recently launched UNEP of our UNEP synthesis report, Making Peace with Nature, a scientific blueprint to tackle the climate, biodiversity, and pollution emergencies. Is this very much cross-cutting nature that is our major driver? The impacts of nitrogen pollution on the marine environment are immense, as we just heard, with rising nutrients runoff and coastal eutrophication. Roughly 80% of the synthetic nitrogen we use as fertilizer to grow food goes to waste. And I think this was highlighted from my previous speakers, from the speakers before me. So much of this wasted nitrogen leaches into our rivers, lakes, and seas, feeding algal blooms that deplete oxygen and destroy life. These dead zones have quadrupled in size since 1950. Also, we've heard today these discussions about the global warming potential of greenhouse gas, that nitrous oxide is nearly 300 times greater than carbon dioxide, and with a time horizon of 100 years. So sustainable nitrogen management offers many low-hanging fruits for climate mitigation and adaptation, while providing quantifiable co-benefits for air quality, freshwater, water quality, coastal zones, and stratospheric ozone depletion. And I think with that, back to you, Asante, and thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you, Leticia. Thank you, the panel, for your thought-provoking answers that shed light from different perspectives and bringing out the nexus between climate change and nitrogen in a coherent manner. Let's go to the next question. How can we coordinate more effectively across the UN nitrogen bearing in mind that it is relevant for so many conventions and programs? We understand that UNEP is developing an interconvention nitrogen coordination mechanism, INCOM, following up on UNIA for resolution on sustainable nitrogen management. Moving forward, what would you identify as priorities? I would like to invite Leticia.
Thank you again, Asante, and thank you for the amazing, relevant question on how to better coordinate. And paragraph A of the UNEA Resolution on Sustainable Nitrogen Management calls on the UNEP Executive Director to consider the options for facilitated improved coordination of policies across the global nitrogen cycle at national, regional, and global levels. And this including consideration of the case for establishing an intergovernmental mechanism for coordination of nitrogen policy. So as we've discussed previously, fragmentation of all of or several instruments is one of the challenges to be overcome for full cycle approach of the nitrogen problem. This is exactly where UNEP is actually putting most of our energy. As the focal point for this UNEP resolution, UNEP has invited member states to contribute to the implementation of the nitrogen resolution through the formation of an intergovernmental working group, which currently consists of 40 countries, is designated focal point. The first key briefing for the nitrogen working group was convened in June last year, with updates on the ongoing international nitrogen assessment, as well as the interconvention nitrogen coordination mechanism in COP you just mentioned, Asante. Under the auspices of the nitrogen working group, a task team to explore possible options for the interconvention nitrogen coordination mechanism has been established. This INCOM task team has already met 3 times and will be presenting its recommendations for the consideration of the nitrogen working group. INCOM recognizes that there are many conventions linked to the nitrogen, as I just mentioned, such as air, water, food security, and climate conventions, and that there is no need to reinvent the wheel by creating a new dedicated convention to address nitrogen pollution. Instead, INCOM looks promoting a coherent approach across existing conventions to inform different policy areas on nitrogen, while tackling the challenges of fragmentation of nitrogen policies. Back to you, Asante. Thanks very much again.
Thanks, Leticia. Over to you, Dirk.
Thank you. On that question, I mean, there's very little I can add to what Leticia said, but maybe what it can do. The first priority, I think, is raising awareness of the existing interlinkages between the different processes. Very many people are locked into their process and they don't see that other things are overlapping significantly with what they're doing. This is happening more and more on several topics, but nitrogen can be a particularly important one. Then we also have to realize that it's a responsibility of countries to implement the activities towards reaching the objectives of the Climate Convention. The convention and the other conventions as well. The convention secretariats are there to support these activities. If we can raise awareness of the interlinkages between the conventions on nitrogen, this is a perspective that can be highlighted in relevant training and capacity building also for countries, so that they look into this when preparing their reports, when implementing their activities. For example, when looking at the enhanced transparency reporting and the NDCs. A challenge will be that there's no one size fits all, because the response of N2O emissions to fertilizer application rates is nonlinear in regions of the world where low nitrogen application rates dominate, such as sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Eastern Europe. Increases in nitrogen fertilizer use would generate relatively small increases in the agricultural N2O emissions. On the other hand, decreases in application rates in regions where application rates are high and exceed crop demand for parts of the growing season will have very large effects on emission reductions. Here we will also find the biggest synergy effects with reducing negative externalities. A key enabler will be to support countries to assess their specific situation and the significant range of co-benefits that can be achieved with reducing N2O emissions in different agricultural systems. In addition, it would be very important to promote local research and cooperation between countries so that we can better learn from each other and how to implement no-regret options with the biggest amount of co-benefits and synergies. Thank you, Asante. Back to you.
Thank you. Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you very much, Asante. Yeah, the linkages are just so many here. I think these type of connecting mechanisms, as such as the one being proposed, are really important if we want to take an integrated approach and ensure we're capturing synergies and not doing something to address one problem that negatively impacts another. I haven't been involved in discussions about income, for example, but I think it should play out as sort of the ultimate expression of an integrated approach. The work we all do needs to be less siloed and more linked. And I think while we all intellectually understand that, the mechanisms we have haven't really caught up with our thinking. In the Air Convention, we see the implementation of the UNEA resolutions on nitrogen and on air as the starting point for closer international cooperation on nitrogen and on air pollution, in fact. I think the view is that we should really use existing policy platforms and agreements and not create new ones. But we think a mechanism such as this could help us better understand, estimate, and communicate all the benefits of reducing nitrogen, which could motivate policy makers and decision makers, and that the goal should be to act as a set of connected agreements, not a number of different agreements all working on the same thing. And the Air Convention has a lot to offer in terms of sharing the considerable work it has done on ammonia. If I might take a minute just to talk a little bit about that. I'm not sure, Hassan, if you were going back to question 2, but the Air Convention has done an awful lot of work on ammonia in particular, but also more broadly on the nitrogen cycle. So the Gothenburg Protocol calls for parties to reduce their emissions of ammonia and to establish their own national ammonia codes for good agricultural practice, and to take account of the need to reduce losses from the whole nitrogen cycle. There is a task force on reactive nitrogen under the Air Convention, and that was created in 2007, and that's really to develop scientific and technical information related to the nature of reactive nitrogen in the context of the nitrogen cycle, and to inform the development of abatement options to reduce emissions of ammonia. So it does technical work to develop a better understanding of the integrated nature of reactive nitrogen, and looks at co-benefits and trade-offs for nitrogen management. So it has created a good number of documents and pieces of work to help parties. There is a guidance document on preventing and abating ammonia emissions from agricultural sources, and a framework code for good agricultural practice. And then most recently, the convention approved a guidance document on integrated sustainable nitrogen management. And an advanced copy of that, it's available on the UNECE website, another plug, but it will be available in due course in all the 3 UNECE languages. And just really quickly, I wanted to say that currently under the Air Convention, we're focused on reviewing the Gothenburg Protocol, after which we will likely amend it. And it will be really important to look at updating the current technical annex for ammonia, and we need to do an evaluation of ammonia control measures. So there is a lot going on under this convention, and it is expected that ammonia and nitrogen will play an even bigger role going forward under the Gothenburg Protocol, and perhaps in countries outside of the European region. And that is a little quip because Canada and the US do not have ammonia targets under the Gothenburg Protocol. But I just thank you for allowing me a little bit of extra time. I just wanted everyone to understand all the considerable work that takes place under the LRTAP Convention, the Air Convention, and what the Air Convention would have to offer to an interlinking mechanism as is being suggested. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jennifer. Now can I give the floor to David, please?
Thanks, Hassanti. And essentially, if we look at the climate challenge, the biodiversity challenge, these are really different facets of the same problem, and we must address these issues together. Similarly, looking at the food and agricultural system, looking at health. All of these issues are interconnected. So we very much welcome this initiative to bring the conventions, all the organizations together in this respect. We have to address these things together. Under the Convention on Biological Diversity, parties are currently negotiating a new framework for this decade, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This is due to be considered at our upcoming conference of the parties, the UN Biodiversity Conference in Kunming, China, scheduled for later this year. And as we prepare for this, and of course, in parallel prepare for COP26 of the Climate Convention in Glasgow, it's really important that we look at these things together. We're pleased to see the British government and the Chinese government as host of COP15 working together in this regard. We're also working closely with the UN Food System Summit and the Desertification Convention, which will meet next year. In terms of priorities moving forward, we, I think, do have a big focus on food and agricultural systems. We heard earlier today from Mark on the importance of looking at the whole food system, including diets, healthy diets. But there's a lot that can be done also at the production level. And really, this is a win-win-win. It's a win for biodiversity, it's a win for climate, it's a win for reducing air pollution, and of course, it's a win for farmers in making better use of limited resources. We've seen, I think, around the world, some really good examples of how by investing in working with farmers on the ground, you can massively reduce nitrogen use and waste at the same time as increasing production and increasing their profits and supporting their livelihoods. We need to do more to work with farmers on the ground in a real participatory way. And the other major priority, I think, is looking at subsidies and the whole incentive structure. We're currently subsidizing nitrogen waste. We're currently subsidizing biodiversity loss. In fact, we're currently subsidizing climate change, and we're spending much more on promoting degradation of the environment than we are on protecting it. So I think priority number one for me would be for governments to take seriously their commitments to reduce perverse subsidies towards biodiversity, towards climate change, and in particular looking at overuse of nitrogen fertilizers and other sources of nitrogen waste. So, as I say, we look very much forward to cooperation as we approach the two conferences of the parties on climate change and on biodiversity later this year. Thanks, Asante.
Thanks, David. Thank you for your comments, which I believe would contribute to a holistic approach in moving forward on tackling nitrogen waste. Participants must be wondering why we have question 3 on the screen and not question 2. In fact, question 2 was to cover to what extent is the convention and programs that you all represent and deal with nitrogen-related issues. When panelists were answering question 1, a lot of ground was covered, and also due to time constraints, we skipped the question 2. But with the answers up to now for question 1 and 3, most issues and comments related to question 2 also came around. Now, coming to the last part, we are just going to go to a Rapid question. Please, panelists, try to give an answer within 15 seconds. Very, very brief. The question is, what will be the key to overcome barriers in tackling nitrogen waste? Can I ask Leticia first?
Sure, thanks, Asante. We must recall the Colombo Declaration as our instrument that sets the vision for us, and we are all committed to achieve the ambitious target to halve nitrogen waste by 2030. And this will definitely lead to immediate benefits in the fight against our triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. This would also lead to $100 billion in savings and foster innovation in sectors like farming, energy, and transport. My final take is tackling nitrogen waste offers multiple win-wins benefits across sustainable development for air, water, biodiversity, ozone depletion, soils, food, and the economy. Nitrogen is not just another problem. It must be part of this reform. Thanks, Asante.
Thanks, Leticia. Dirk now. Thanks. Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you. Well, I think that the fragmentation that's been mentioned of policies between all these nitrogen-related issues has really slowed progress in the achievement of policy goals, and it's you know, the coherence of local, national, and international actions isn't there, and this is risk trade-offs, and I think the risk of those trade-offs is what can act as barriers to change. So I think if we can reduce the risks of these trade-offs, we can reduce the barriers. And I think it all comes back to taking an integrated approach and potentially the income. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. And David, you?
So I'm going to reinforce the point I made about subsidies. We have to really change the incentive structure, start subsidizing biodiversity, subsidizing a healthy future, and stop subsidizing waste. So redirect the still vast amounts we're spending subsidizing, for example, nitrogen fertilizers, and use it to produce, to support farmers in productive ways. And then I think secondly, just recognizing that this target of halving nitrogen waste can be done. There are many good examples around the world showing that it's entirely viable. So we need to believe in that and all pull together to achieve this target.
Thank you, David. And that brings us close to this session. And I thank all the panelists. And now I invite Professor Mark Sutton to sum up. Over to you, Mark.
Well, thank you very much, Asante. And thank you, panelists. Thank you, honourable ministers. This has been a really exciting session to see everybody coming together from UK together with all the countries of South Asia. We realise that India and Pakistan were not able to join us today, but we realise the challenges of COVID that the countries are really facing. And indeed, that is the point, that we are facing multiple emergencies at present. Some of them are short-term emergencies and some of them are long-term. The COVID is right with us right now. We're looking, of course, ultimately to a post-COVID future. And we've entitled this meeting also not just about nitrogen for climate, but also green recovery. So how is nitrogen going to help us recover? With that climate emergency in parallel, and as Leticia has said, the pollution emergency, bringing together issues of biodiversity, air quality, water quality. The message we're having, I think, coming together is that it's about bringing all these issues together in an integrated way. There is clearly, from the government statements made today, a great willingness for action, a great willingness to work on sustainable nitrogen management, to build on the Colombo Declaration. We've heard multiple times statements of people saying, let's work towards a goal to halve nitrogen waste. Now, that halve nitrogen waste is, of course, an arbitrary goal. How far should we go? How quickly? That must be a discussion for the next couple of days. We will hear tomorrow in day 2 statements from the scientific community, NGOs and business on their perspectives. And on day 3, we'll come back together in a session with the governments to say, how do they want to move forward? What are the metrics? What is the ambition level? It's quite clear that if we're going to make this progress, we've got to overcome these barriers, as we've just heard you as panelists say. Different views on overcoming the barriers, how to get nitrogen really visible as part of those national commitments. We often say nitrogen is everywhere and invisible, and that's our challenge here, to make nitrogen not invisible, but visible. The whole discussion of carbon equivalence, carbon everything, would make people think that nitrogen has no role in climate. And I think today's session has clearly shown that's not the case. Nitrogen's got a critical role with climate. The nitrous oxide role is there, but also issues of interactions with air quality, the PM 2.5, the water pollution, they're all there. So that's our challenge ahead. Let's not forget that it's going to be difficult on the way, some changes, but there's also a huge opportunity. We are looking towards that goal of saving $100 billion a year from halving nitrogen waste. That's a potential goal. But to handle that, changing issues of health subsidies, this means that it's a money-saving opportunity for governments, for farmers, for wastewater managers. There's an opportunity for all of us. So that's our challenge, to make nitrogen visible. And I want to thank you, Asanthe, and panelists and all the honourable speakers for bringing this discussion together today.